Hey everybody, and welcome to Email Copywriting for Marketers. I'm Tim Yeadon, Principal and Creative Director at Clyde Golden, an email marketing agency here in Seattle. This video is going to cover what I call bedside manner for brands. I love this topic because when you're writing, you always need to take tone into account. But our brand guides rarely give us guidance on how to get there. Before we get going, if you take a look at the website, you'll also see that we've created several downloadable worksheets to go with the course. You don't want to miss these. They make it easy to apply what you'll be learning to the projects you'll be doing at work. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. So I promise this is the only medical photo in the entire presentation. It'll be over soon. A while back, I read Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, and in it, he talks about why some doctors who make mistakes like this get sued for malpractice, and some doctors who make similar mistakes, they do not. And it has nothing to do with the number of mistakes made. What it turns out is doctors with poor bedside manners were sued at a higher rate than those with highly rated bedside manners. So those who were sued, they didn't listen as much. They didn't ask as many questions. And especially important, they weren't making the patient feel like they were part of the process. So think about that. It was more important for the patients to like their doctor than the actual level of service they received from their doctor. It's not surprising that we often see the same thing with our customers. How they felt about an interaction mattered most. This is what builds loyalty. So let's chat about loyalty. People aren't loyal because you did something for them. It's because they did something for you, and they found it to be a satisfying experience. They took a chance on you, and it worked out great, and they thought, well, I'd do that again. Our customers, they give us a shot, and if it goes well and the exchange feels positive, there's a good chance they'll be back. And that's what you're looking for. The truth is, somewhere along the line, you're going to screw up. A misshipped item, a wrong charge, the wrong coffee order, a canceled flight, or maybe just you or someone at your business is going to have a crappy day and the interaction's not going to go great. But a bit of hard-earned loyalty will help save that relationship. If you want to read more about this, it's called the Ben Franklin effect. Franklin describes how he dealt with another member of the Pennsylvania legislature in the 18th century, and this is somebody who he didn't get along well with. Having heard that this other person had a library, and in that library was this really scarce and hard to find book, Franklin writes a note and says, hey, I've always wanted to read that book. Would you please do me the favor of lending it to me? The other fellow, who Franklin had a difficult time with, lent him the book. And Franklin writes, he sent it immediately, and I returned in about a week with another note, expressing strongly my sense of the favor. And when we met the next time in the house, he spoke to me, which he had never bothered to speak to Franklin before, and with great civility, and ever after manifested a readiness to serve me on all occasions. So we became great friends, and our friendship continued to his death. And it was because Franklin knew how to have a good interaction with somebody and build a little bit of loyalty. You'll often find that a common experience that goes well between two parties, that also leads to just a better relationship over time. So what is the relationship between voice and tone? I hear a lot of different definitions, and here's mine. Your voice is synonymous with your brand. They are one and the same. Your tone is how you adapt that brand voice to people and events across the customer journey. So in essence, your voice, as seen and perceived by other people, will be a sum of your tones, the way you interacted with them across the journey. And this matters because, while large, expensive campaigns offer great energy to your marketing efforts, to me, loyalty is won and lost at the programmatic level. It's the million little winks and nods, emails, push notifications, welcome notes, receipts, error messages. Large branding efforts matter. They guide us. But small ball, these programs, this is tone. And this is where you actually build or you lose credibility. So here's one of those great moments. This could go either way when you get an email like this. So the backstory is I had a 6 a.m. flight and I got this note from an airline the night before, and I own a small business. I always buy the cheapest ticket. When you get a note like this, you instantly wonder, am I about to get bumped? I wonder how the other ticket holders felt. So what are some of the things that could be tested here? You could test tone. You could test matter of fact, as in volunteers are needed to take a later flight, versus enthusiastic, prefer to catch a later flight. What if you're actually able to turn that into a benefit? So when it comes to messaging, here's where we get a lot of our guidance from brand books like this. Every business has one. Anybody who works in retail, especially anybody who works at a large B2B company, odds are marketing department has put together a brand book. And you get all sorts of guidance within it. I grabbed this one off the internet. This is for Urban Outfitters. This one's probably out of date, but it's a great example because we've seen this so many times. You get all sorts of guidance in these. Logo usage, typography, packaging, how to correctly interpret palette colors, imagery, and then you get to voice and its brand tenets. Generally, I end up with 3 or 4 words that are meant to give me guidance. If voice is the sum of the tones, how would you translate this to a specific moment in the customer journey? Are you going to be cheeky and direct at the same time? Are you going to be cheeky when your credit card fails? Maybe, probably not. Here's another example at the brand level. Simple, playful, human, honest. At what moment in the journey should you be playful? You should always probably be honest. I suppose simple and human are great things to be as well. But it's lists like this that caused me as a writer and then as a creative director to try to come up with a framework for interpreting to the customer journey. And we're going to talk about that in a second. So here's the last one that I'll show. And I'm actually going to use this example for a testing framework that we're about to go through. So how would you translate these voice elements to a balanced tone? Overall, these are actually really good. Humorous is probably a little more difficult. It's probably the proud nail that sticks up ever so slightly. You know, I need some guidance. Copywriters, my team needs some guidance. So here are my thoughts. You're going to start by sketching out the customer's point of view. And really, you're just trying to get to a point where I feel like I can infer the user's mood in a specific event. Across the top here, you have spots along the journey. Here's a moment where someone's downloaded an app, and then I want to onboard them. Usually I know that if there are a couple key behaviors that people do, there's a better chance they'll use the app in the long run. And so I'm going to want to walk them through them. Engagement over time. Entropy occurs and win back is needed. And then error handling. Something goes awry, password, card doesn't go through. And so you think about each spot along the journey and you ask, what actions are they taking? What is the customer doing at each stage? What are their motivations? Why would they be motivated to keep going? Why do they care? What questions would that customer have or that reader have at the moment? What are the uncertainties or other things they might be curious about? And then barriers, what process? Is there a cost or another mitigator that would keep them moving on to the next stage? If I knew that and I could address it, that's very useful. If you do those things, you have a fighting chance to infer their mood. If I can infer their mood, I bet I can come up with the right tone, and then I have a really great chance of engaging them in a respectful way. In working through this, you may discover there's an area you've never thought about. Maybe you've never thought about error handling, and you need to think about what motivations or questions or barriers, and in turn, what's the likely mood in a scenario that a reader may have. Super useful. So let's think about onboarding in this scenario with these brand voices. We just went through the research. In onboarding, what tone would work here? Based on what we sketched out on the previous slide, my instinct is users achieve fewer key behaviors when humor is used during onboarding. I've always believed that during onboarding, somebody has a ton of energy, a little bit of anxiety, they want to get going, and what realistically they need is some direction. And perhaps humor isn't the right spot to do it. Humor might be the right spot depending on your brand, depending on the product, depending on the audience. And in this scenario with an app download where somebody's trying to do research to find a home, humor might not be the right thing. I know that because I sketched it out and I could infer their mood. Sometimes a visualization helps. Anytime you can come up with something like this, it's often a huge help. I work with a lot of different personalities, and you're going to work with people in product, people in marketing, people in the C-suite. You're going to work with people on your own team. And whether it's documented long form or it's a visualization, it's extremely helpful to create something like this. Here I'm just simply showing how I may weight the voice in a specific moment. Many elements can impact tone. Obviously, words can impact tone. Color can evoke moods, but there's a lot of other things we can consider. And this is something worth talking about if you're working with a designer, if you're working with a developer, if you have a marketing manager, if there's somebody on the product side. Photography, illustration, typography, motion. These are all things that could meet somebody's mood where it's at. I'm interested in seeing some research in the use of haptics based on mood. There is something often very satisfying when you do something on a device and you get the small buzz and you're like, okay, that took. Okay, my payment went through. If my hypothesis is something will work best without humor, I need to know what I'm going to test it against. For instance here, I'll probably test it against serious. You know, for a few years after college, I was a newspaper reporter. I covered dozens of murder trials. One afternoon, I was back in the judge's chambers chatting with the Superior Court judge, and I asked him, how do you really know if somebody did it? The judge explained to me, the defense pulls one way and the prosecution pulls the other, and in between, that little ribbon on the tug-of-war rope, where it lands, that's where justice is established. And there's a similarity with tone testing, in which I'm going to start at one end, intention, and then I'm going to hone in. And here is an example. I did this test a number of years ago. This was a push prime opt-in in an app. If you want someone to opt in for push prime messages, the operating system of the device is actually going to serve up the prompt, but you only get one shot to do it. And so you can do a prime message, which comes from the app itself, in which you say, hey, would you like to opt in to push messages? And if they click no in the prime message, then you could show it again. But if they click no in the OS message, that's it, that you only got the one shot. So what I wanted to do was to just only trigger the operating system message to those who truly were interested in it. And we began by first testing formal versus funny and formal won, and then we tested formal versus matter of fact, and matter of fact won. Only in testing intention are you really going to land somewhere in the middle. So the advice is always test intention and then hone in, because eventually that ribbon is going to land in the right spot. You want to document and share your learnings over time, because tone is a fussy thing, and there's so many different scenarios you're going to work through. And one of the reasons you're going to want to document this is if you don't measure, you cannot improve. And by documenting, you'll know if you've improved, or you'll know if it didn't work. And also, over time, it's nice to go back and look for common threads, patterns. You know, maybe you're going to see something that you can automate and reuse what works. One other great reason to document is that after going through and getting the tone correct across the customer journey, you'll probably be promoted and you can use this to train the next person. So let's go ahead and recap bedside manner for brands. First, emotional engagement matters more than customer satisfaction. Your voice is the sum of your tones. You can infer their likely mood, and that helps you choose the correct tone. And there's a lot of elements you can use to impact tone. If you're not sure, force the issue with tension. And then document your results, share your victories, and share your failures and your learnings. So this concludes Bedside Manner for Brands, our third section in the course. I hope you found this content useful. If you did, please send me a note at tim@ClydeGolden. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what you learned and if you have any questions. Thanks again, and have a great day.